Welcome to the IT Experience podcast. We're here to guide IT and global business services professionals in navigating experience management, focusing on how to optimize budgets and drive better business outcomes. Join us as we discuss the trends, tools, and strategies with top industry experts that are transforming the future of service delivery in large enterprises. This podcast is brought to you by Happy Signals, the leading experience management platform for IT and global business services.
Today's conversation is going to be an interesting one. We are going to talk about CSAT, so customer satisfaction measurement and scores and all things related with Mark. It's really nice to be here today with you, Mark.
Indeed. Thank you for having me here, Sakari. I've been looking forward to this one. We've been talking about it for a while and very happy we've finally got on to have a chat about this one. Try and put some things to bed on it, I think. Really out of our minds and into the ether.
Yeah, perfect. But as we start speaking about CSAT, I mean, this is something that has been around for a while. And if we would ask almost any IT professional working in IT support or IT services, if we ask them, do you have CSAT? Most of them would say yes. But why is that? I mean, what's the history of CSAT? I know that you looked a little bit into that. So do you want to talk a little bit about where CSAT came from?
Yeah. So you're right. I did look into it a bit, and I've been using it personally in various organisations for a long time. So pretty much, heavily summarised, born in the 50s, grew up in the sort of 70s, 80s, 90s, and continues to today. And you know, it measures those. It was born, I think, to measure that sort of the customer experience side of things, as opposed to just the engineering parts, right? The bits that move. And it's used everywhere, right? We know it's used everywhere. We've all been in companies that have sent out surveys 1 to 5 rating for that particular interaction, and that's a key differentiator here. I think that CSAT was born to look at that single interaction, not necessarily the bigger, wider picture. So yeah, that's the history in a nutshell. It's about 75 years old, if you think of it that way, and it's been pretty much the same.
75.
Yeah, I think it was born in the 50s. When I was reading up on it a few days back, it was born in the 50s. Older than me, despite the fact I look older than it. It's older than me.
It's interesting because I think my first contact with CSAT was when I started at Happy Signals, and I heard the stories that our founders had experienced before founding the company. And one could even say that CSAT is the reason why Happy Signals exists. Because in the beginning, when the founders were doing IT service work for big organizations in Finland, they came across these numbers. They wanted to find out what's the experience with these different IT portal services, etc. And they came across that one company said, our CSAT is 3.7. We don't really know what if it's good or if it's bad, but it's 3.7. Then they went to another organization and they said that our CSAT is also 3.7. And then maybe a third one that said our CSAT is 3.7. They started to wonder, like, how is it possible that all these companies have this 3.7 as their CSAT average? And then they started digging into it, and they found out that's what was stipulated in the SLAs. It was in the contracts that if they stayed at 3.7 or above, they wouldn't get hit by penalties. So it was the agreements that dictated what the CSAT was, and then they had just become very good at playing the game to make sure that it went up when it needed to and stayed at least at that level. And what does this tell you? I mean, you've been on that side, like working in those organizations. So, Mark, what's your take on this, like 3.7 average, and why that happens?
Yeah, so back in my days when I was a head of service management in an organization, we were using CSAT in the end user compute space, heavily in that space. It was in the contract and everything else with the third party provider. It wasn't 3.7, it was higher than that. It was about 4.1 or whatever it was. And guess what? We always hit 4.1. But looking back, I can't actually remember anything that changed because of that 4.1 at all. You know, there was a whole load of stuff behind it, such as, you know, we didn't survey every single interaction. Now we're talking about incidents specifically here. We didn't measure every one, which then opens up to a whole big can of worms around how reliable can it be. But 4.1 alone was all we heard, and that was in every report, and it was just a very faint line, on a whole load of KPIs and SLAs and what have you. It was one line item that sort of got fluffed over because we hit it, right? And you're right what you said. If you have a target, you'll always hit it, right? Because there's ways around doing that. Yes, we either reduce the frequency or we survey a specific group who we know will always mark highly. We survey our friends, right? I've seen vendors, service providers surveying service providers, right? So one would know that their friend had dealt with a ticket. Guess what? That's a 5, right? So yeah, I think you would always hit if you make a target. You'd always hit it, and I'm a big fan of sort of what we did in the end was minimum and expected. So our minimum was X, but we expected Y, which was typically X plus in that world plus 0.5 or whatever the number might be. So we always had something to aim for. We wanted to be that from the minimum, yes. And there was consequences of being at the minimum all of the time or just below the minimum. Yep.
Yeah. What about, I mean, if CSAT has been around since the 50s and it is so widely used, there must be a reason. What are the reasons why it is so common and so popular? There must be something. It's not that people working in IT are rational people. They make smart decisions. But why is CSAT, when we know all the different things that can be, all the flaws it has, but why is it so popular?
I think partly it's easy to do, right? So it's easy to ask someone on a 1 to 5 rate and how they feel, right? And I think it's also easy to say we're hitting this number and we're good. So contracts are probably driving a lot of this behavior. I think if you had if you had an organization, and I've been in many organizations where we don't have service providers, don't have external service providers specifically, there was no CSAT being done at all, right? We were all colleagues, we were all friends, we all just got on with it. And it's when you bring another party in that's costing you money, there's a contract behind it. You need to make sure that numbers are lived to, right, and they're achieving what you want them to achieve, supported by all the KPIs in the background that should come together to make a better experience. So I think in summary, it's mostly to do with contracts. As soon as you throw those contracts out there nowadays, anyway, in IT, there might have been other reasons, and I talked a lot about the smiley faces when you go into a store at the checkout, right, where you've got the 5 smiley faces and you can say this was a good experience or a bad one. The same is the same is true of bathrooms at airports. The 1 to 5 smiley faces or the green, amber, red, which I've learned recently actually drive behavior. You press one of those buttons and it indicates that things are either good or bad, and if they get so many of the reds over a period of time, they send someone to the bathrooms to check out what's going on. Now, of course, bathrooms are infinitely easier to see what's wrong than what it might be in IT. It's easy to see that the water's cold, or there's no way to dry your hands, or whatever it might be. It's much more complicated when you just get a score in IT. It's 4.1. So what, right? What does that tell me? Where can I improve? I think that's the point I'm thinking of here. It's not always about how well you're doing, but where can I improve? And I think it suffers a little bit there because you can't really see the finer details.
And it's interesting because it's so common and because it's so easy to do. Then it is also in many other places. And we had this example of these 1 to 5 ratings when it came to Airbnb and Uber. So there are certain behaviors that those platforms now expect to do, but there are actually differences in how people rate services depending on where they live, for example. And we had this funny example when we talked about CSAT internally with one of our people said that I had been taking Uber in Finland for some years, and Finnish people won't rate it the same way that Americans do. So you don't necessarily give the 5, even if things are just normal, or you get the expected ride, they come on time and they bring you to the place where you're supposed to go, etc. But so his rating was something like 4 point something in the low, just above 4. He goes to the States, tries to hitch a ride. He can't catch a ride. Because in the States, the expectation is that you give a 5 unless something happens. And this is one of the things with CSAT is that when you have an average number and you try to figure out what it actually means, if you don't have any other context around it, it's very difficult to understand, is it good or is it bad, even when the score is high.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I think that's the big con of CSAT, if you want to call it that. Or when I mean pros and cons, it's the cons of CSAT. And I do exactly the same thing, by the way. When I get a ride, I tend to, as long as the guy turns up or the lady turns up and takes me where I want to go, I always mark it a 5, because that reciprocal marking, right? They can grade me as well, and then if I give them a 4, they give me a 4. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of crazy, and in a way, I've stopped it. More recently, I've stopped doing it because it doesn't add, in my view, it doesn't add a great deal of value. It would be nice as a driver, I guess, to understand the person who's turning up is good, is a nice person, and is not going to be in your car or whatever it might be. And it's equally the same for the passenger, right? To know that the driver gets a solid score. They're a sort of 4.9 and above. They're safe. Mostly, I would think, but yeah, I've got into that reciprocal scoring now. Well, I have been, where 5s every time, because you don't want your own score to come down, and that's probably how IT have been doing this in some ways in the past as well. If you follow
Yeah.
that line of thought.
But isn't that crazy though? I mean, the system has been put in place in order to gauge the satisfaction of the customers or the internal end users that IT is providing services to. And now, because it has been gamed and there is this reciprocity, maybe people are giving a 5 out of fear that if they give anything else than a 5, the next time they ask for support, they actually won't get the same quality support as they would otherwise. And I think this has actually
Yeah,
been one of the reasons why experience management as a more wider trend has now been growing in the 2020s and slightly before, and why Happy Signals also has gone into this area, is that you see all the flaws. It doesn't tell you the stories. It doesn't tell you the why behind it. It's just an average number. So what are the developments that have happened in the last few years that you see being beneficial to understanding experience beyond that traditional CSAT?
yeah. So obviously, Happy Signals have been around for about 11 years now. So we're at the forefront of this change, I guess. I think more widely, sort of 2020 and above, saw real movement. There were clearly early adopters, and with the company I used to work for was an early adopter. But now we see the need to go beyond that number. People, I think, have got a bit tired and a bit, they're aware of the watermelon effect. They're aware of the way of things can be scored, and the fact that actually you can take no action with that number. Right? So that's already happened. So it's almost like the rise of ITXM, if you want to call it that, and the rise of now XLAs, experience level agreements, and the frameworks around that. So when people move from CSAT, now we're starting to talk about experience indicators, the things that resulted in that score. So I scored 4. Why is that? It's because service was a little bit too slow for my liking. Thanks very much. I needed something much more quickly. Communication was poor, or you didn't fix my issue properly. So we bring this experience data in. We call it X data. And then we start looking at other areas as well. So the experience indicators, we also look at productivity. So happiness in its own right is one thing. And I bring this story up quite often, actually. One of our customers I've been speaking to more recently had a situation where the SAP tickets in their organization were getting an enormous score, right? People were really happy with the score, plus 93, I think the number was, for SAP tickets. And ordinarily, you'd have just said, let's leave that alone then, right? Everything's good. We should move on to something less, people are less happy with. But when you start looking at the other side of the coin, the productivity, you saw that the average lost time for those tickets was 9 hours. So that's not necessarily saying that the customer was bang out or the employee was not able to work at all, but the perception from that employee was it's taken 9 hours, or it's cost me 9 hours of time here to move forward with this order, whatever it was in SAP. Turns out that these things are really easy to fix when you can see both things. Happiness was good, great, but lost time put alongside it wasn't so great. It's almost like I say all the time, Africa and South America, it's like 2 parts of the jigsaw puzzle. You can bang them together and it creates a one blob, right? One entity, yeah? In one landmass. They sort of fit nicely together. And that's the same with lost time and happiness. So from their side of point of view, that no one would have done anything if they just looked at the happiness score. And I guess you could take that back to a CSAT score of 5 or 4.9, right, out of 5. You'd have said, we're good, nothing to do here. But the productivity was, the lost time was high, So simple changes around the service portal resulted in tickets going not through a service desk in that case because they couldn't handle these tickets. They went straight to the SAP support team, shaved off 5 hours of lost time per ticket on average. So, that's where CSAT wouldn't have helped at all. It had just been a tick in the box. We're doing rather well there. In fact, we're way above 4.1 or 3.7. We're at 4.9. Move on. But it wasn't good enough. People were still losing a load of time. But so I think that's the extension of a score is the experience indicators and productivity. And of course, when you also throw into that technical data, then you're looking at sort of more advanced XLAs, XLA 2.0 and above, I think it is. And of course, the operational data as well, where the person is there something the same in sales that's happening or marketing that's happening that we can pin back to operational data out of ITSM tools, for example. So I think that's the change. So in summary, from 2020 onwards, things have really ramped up. Before that, there's some early adopters, sort of from the sort of 2015 or so, and I think it's all changing for the better for sure. Like I said earlier, CSAT has its space, it has a place in this world, but it's limiting, and that's the big problem with it that people now are trying to address.
And of course, there are other metrics as well. Somebody listening to this webinar might think that we don't use CSAT per se, but we use, for example, smiley faces, or we use thumbs up, thumbs down. We might be using NPS and other systems. NPS is quite common, and the Happy Signals does use the mathematical model of NPS in the background. And when it comes to the CSAT, as you said in the beginning, it's sort of like this. Maybe it's sort of like a stable line all the time. And one of the benefits of looking at how NPS changes when you take the positives minus the negatives and ignore the neutrals is that it changes faster when things happen. Even small changes are reflected in the score quicker. But we spoke about this before the webinar recording, that NPS actually as a question that would you recommend is not necessarily a good question either to ask. Because when you're working in a company, it's often IT decides or the business decides which applications, which services, which processes the end users have to go through and what they have access to in order to do their work. So if you ask, would you recommend, as a question that seems a little bit whimsical, like I don't have a choice. I mean, I can't recommend something that I can't choose, and neither can my colleagues. So any thoughts on the NPS? Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're absolutely right. They have no choice, right? Unless you're lucky enough to be in a position where you can change things in an organization, you live with the service provider you're given and everything that comes with that. So I think we clearly use the NPS mathematics, sort of the percentage of promoters take away the percentage of detractors. And what I like about it, and what I've always loved about it, is when you see that on a chart, when you see that on a trend line, you see the dips and you see the positives, right? Those dips always relate. You can always pen them back to a problem that's happened, something has happened. The service desk was closed for the day or whatever it might be. There was a massive email issue or whatever the thing might be that's happened. So I like the way that the NPS mathematics allows that to show. And you can clearly indicate where issues were and you can tie them back to an event. I think what I also like about it is it focuses on the positive outcomes. So everything except 9 and 10, there's something to improve, right? There's something there. Clearly, there's cultural things as well. Some countries or people of some countries do not, or some cultures do not often score 9s and 10s, and that's okay. We can work that out because we have benchmark data that shows that. We can see that in X country its average is 67, and in another country it's 92, whatever it might be. So I think we can work that out. But I just love the fact that it promotes positivity. And also thinking about the neutrals, that we can easily think in a net promoter score that neutrals sort of don't count, and our customers find that there's such rich data there. They're the ones that almost were very happy, right? The ones that it would take minor things to fix to push them into the 9 to 10 bracket and be happy with the service. Again, always in that combination, looking at productivity. So even NPS on its own, I've said this many times before, one number doesn't tell you anything. It gives you an indication. It gives you a direction. It tells you if you're getting better or worse. It tells you if you're static, but it alone, it doesn't do it. So we often talk about big numbers, have a big target of plus 85, whatever the number might be. But actually, it's the detail, it's the line items that makes a lot of difference. When you look at those different countries where in China it might be 92, but in the Netherlands it's 46, or whatever the numbers might be. So you can hone in on the problem. The big number itself, like the CSAT score, the 4.1, the 3.7, even the big number in NPS format doesn't give you everything. You need to look further. You need to be able to see more deeply. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually, like a couple of weeks ago, started reading this book, Flow of Averages, and I love how actually like the average of can be so misleading sometimes. And they use this example from sometime in the 50s as well, where there was a drawing in a newspaper where they showed that somebody like drowned in a river that was on average 3 feet deep, but it was just like 1 foot deep somewhere,
Yes.
and then there was that dip. And I have noticed this with our own customers when you dive into the data, is that sometimes if they look at that top level number, they can't see everything that it consists of. And when you look at a large enterprise with maybe tens of thousands of employees, you might have an area where 500 employees of one single location have massive issues going on, but they just get sort of they disappear into the bigger number. And having a tool like that has that operational data that allows you to drill into it and start seeing where those pockets of happy and unhappy people are, you might then be able to identify and find those areas that are quick fixes, but that will also make a significant number of people happy again. And it has happened more than once that our customers actually find being able to not go just into the operational data, but drill down into the comments, start understanding patterns in the open text comments as well. It could be a few individual feedbacks from end users that highlight something that actually is a systemic problem, that doesn't show up in the traditional IT metrics, that doesn't show up in the technical metrics or the SLAs. And I think that's one of also it puts high value on the ability to change the sort of the horizon of what you're looking at. Are you looking at the bigger picture or the narrow picture, and zoom in and out in an easy way? So it's not just about having the data, but also how can you work with the data? How can you drill into the data?
Yeah, exactly that. I mean, I have the relatively famous story internally around a report I did for a customer who needed a bit of help on some stuff. And one of the things I always look at is the countries, right? It's a global company with, I don't know, 60, 70 countries they operate in. And I always do a table of highest response volume down. And typically I fit as much as I can on a page, right? In PowerPoint, and it morphs into a PDF or whatever. And it just so happens that I could get down to, say, 20 countries in one landscape page in PowerPoint. And the 20th one, I can't remember the exact country. I think it was United Arab Emirates. The score was at 32 or something, and the big ones at the top where they live and where they mainly host people were up there in the sort of thousands of responses, tens of thousands of responses, and really high scores. But when I went through the report with them, I said, well, in the end, this is what I see from the country perspective. They said, this is really, really good. They said, I'm so pleased you included the United Arab Emirates in there, because that's our growth region. That's our growth country. We're growing there. It's like, wow, I think it was more of an accident from my perspective that it just fit in the slide. But for their perspective, if you just looked at the UAE, it was a blip in terms of volume on the whole. But it won't be a blip in 5 years' time, 3 years' time. It'll be much higher than that. So to see problems there now through a low score and high loss time, it gave them a steer as to, and also, of course, the experience indicators, it gave them a steer as to what to do next. We need to fix X in this country and Y in that country. And if we do that, then it'll allow our growth to carry on or have a slicker path, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And actually, there's one aspect that comes the comparability of data as well. Every now and then we come across organizations that really want to be able to customize the service that they send. They want to enable different teams to create their own surveys, send it out so that and there's many rational reasons why that might be desirable. But actually, when you zoom out and you think about the allocation of resources to different parts of IT, having comparable data, so having a standardized approach that remains the same month after month, year after year, actually will provide so much more value in order to analyze and understand longer term trends and maybe learn from other regions and other countries. What did we do well in this other country that's really happy that we could apply and implement in this growth region that at the moment is not quite there yet? And that standardization is sometimes a tricky thing, because as IT people are often engineering minded and they do have a lot of thoughts about what's the right way to do things, they might have a different view across different areas on what to ask, how to ask, when to ask. But without the standardization, it's not really possible to do comparable analysis on, is this number actually a good number or not?
So I think going back to the comparability, we provide the ability to compare with other industries, companies in other industries, and I think you can act in isolation. We're going back to CSAT again. You can act in isolation and say 4.1 is where we want to get to, and that's only because we're at 4.0 last year or 3.9. We're up a little bit of an uptick. But I think when you can compare your data to other industries, and when you can compare your data to other customers, well, our customers potentially with customers in the same countries that you're operating in the same industry you're in, then it becomes a little bit more easy to compare what's realistic. Yeah, there's no point. For example, I had another customer recently who stuck out there where they, we're going to aim for a plus 95. Plus 95 NPS in the UK is practically impossible. So looking at our data, we would have said, well, what's entirely reasonable is plus 67 or plus 78 if you look at request, right? Just 67 in instance and request 78. And lost time is whatever it is, 3 hours this and 4 hours that. I think you can go alone sometimes and get caught up in this whole mess of we're aiming too high. And I'm a big fan of aiming massively high, but the problem comes when you then tie penalties to that, and you tie contractual agreements to that. It becomes really awkward and a horrible conversation to have with your customer that, yes, we all want to hit 95, but the reality is we know we won't. With all the best will in the world, we'll aim for it. Of course, that'll be our target always, to be a plus 100, but the reality is we may not get there. So somehow you need to handle that in your contract. It'd be a minimum expected, like I talked about earlier. We often see that in customer contracts now.
And it's a good point, because it's having a benchmark. And for example, in our case, since Happy Signals uses the same standardized approach across all of the customers, it means that the benchmark will allow you to actually, instead of fixating on a single number for everyone, you could actually maybe say that your goal is to be at parity or be at the same level as the benchmark for each location, each country. And we have seen that in companies that, especially Germany and Netherlands in Europe, are countries where it's notoriously hard to get high scores. And if an IT organization is trying to come to the same results or the same score in Germany and Netherlands as what they achieve, for example, in the United States, it's going to be a tough battle. And you might be throwing too much resources into that area, not understanding that it's actually just cultural behavior on how you rate services. And in the same way, you might be thinking that, we're doing great in this one location where our score is plus 85, and not understanding that actually in that country, it's culturally inappropriate to give anything except a 10 unless things go really, really bad. And then again, like, you're satisfied being in a place where actually your services are still below that benchmark. So having that standardized approach, not just internally, but also across all the customers, to be able to have that comparison and objective view on a bigger picture, it does help a lot, and it becomes more believable as well in the leadership's eyes if the IT service quality is being questioned at any level.
And I would agree. I mean, I had another practical case of this with a customer who wanted to move their global service desks from plus 64 to plus 84. Okay, so we want them to be 20 points higher. And when you look at what service desks have on average, it's not 84. It's not that. And when you look at the countries they were in, was practically impossible to achieve. And I jokingly said, is it you can achieve this tomorrow by getting your response rates up in China, because we know that people in China score 9s and 10s an awful lot, and their response rate there was much lower than say in Europe. So if you want to play the game, you can just lift the response rate in China and things will get better for you. But that's not the point. Do you know what I mean? The point is not always to hit a score, and this is the danger with all measurement areas, that the score is the target, and you hit the target and everything's bliss, and it's really not. Sometimes you have to look at those details. And my fear is CSAT, if it's just one score globally, or even NPS one score globally, that there's a whole load of stuff being missed out on that could make things better for those people that are not in that bracket. The ones that are in the cultures that are just never going to get there.
Yeah, that's true. So I think we have come to a point where we understand like the shortcomings of CSAT, and we understand why a standardized approach with a different methodology. And of course, we're biased. I mean, we work both for Happy Signals, so we do believe in the approach that we have chosen, and we do see great results among our customers. But let's think about this question that sometimes is like, is it just the tooling? Like, is tooling enough? Now we have the data, we can drill into it, but is that enough? What beyond that is needed in order to actually drive those sustainable, positive changes in an organization?
I think you need a culture of wanting to do it first off, right? So we've lived in this world where we've been hitting a number all the time, and it's the watermelon effect. We all hear about that. It's rife, right? That's out there everywhere. Sorry, I should say everywhere. In most places that I'm aware of, it's like that. So I think that the tool is one thing for sure. You've got to, the things we see all the time, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, is we don't survey on every interaction. We're selective in whatever way, right? I'm not suggesting that's a sort of a meaningful selection, but we select every 1 in 10 or 1 in 5, or we send a survey the next day. Those things are things that we don't necessarily agree with as an organization, and I certainly don't agree with. I've seen both, and I've seen the benefits to asking every single time. So I think asking every single time is really important. Using a, and obviously you've got to have a tool that can do that. So yeah, of course you can build your own. That's okay. Many people do. They use out of the box ITSM tools to do that. That's okay. But you won't. But by building your own, you introduce bias. We've been through this many times, where just asking the question in a slightly different way, or color coding the numbers if you use an NPS format, or color coding the smiley faces, it sets a bias. It pushes people down a path that if you scored on if it was the NPS scale, 0 to 6 is negative, and logically people think it's anything less than half, less than 5. So people are less likely to score in that 0 to 6. If they were going to be a 6, they might say, well, that's still negative, I'll push it to a 7 or 8. Do you know what I mean? So there's things that we talk about all the time with our customers around not biasing the results, keeping everything vanilla and plain, using a tool that can respond quickly, can show you where the insight is, instead of having to pull reports left, right, and center to do that, and guessing much of the time. So when we talk about setting these things up, we talk about something that's simple, something that's quick, something that's not biased, something that we regularly do, every interaction. And when we look at outside of CSAT, the wider IT, we look at proactive measures and measuring every day as opposed to measuring once a year. We can talk about that another time. Getting the right buy-in. I talked about the culture. You've got to have the culture to do this. If you've got no intention of doing anything with the data, then frankly, don't measure, because it's not going to help anyone. It's just going to be another burden, in my view, right? So you've got to have this culture of wanting to change. And I think every company will say they have that culture. I think the reality is that investing time in that is not always there, right? So certainly with all of our customers, obviously they've brought into the ITXM thing, and they want to do better. So they've brought into that. And then, the most important thing for me is doing something with the data. And that's where CSAT, I think, falls down quite heavily, because you don't know what to do with it. I go back to the bathroom analogy. You turn up and someone's scored a load of red angry faces, and you think, well, okay, now I've got to search the bathroom. What's wrong, right? It would have been much easier if they could have in some way said, I'm unhappy about the cold water, or I'm unhappy about the lack of cubicles, whatever the thing might be. So I think that that ability to see detail is key. The ability to communicate out and tell people what you're doing with the information, and frankly, doing something, right? I mean, all too often we see, yeah, we're scoring, we've turned these things on and we've turned the surveys on and nothing's changing with us because you're doing nothing with the information, right? So there's something to be done, and you've got to invest in that. I'm not suggesting you need an army of people. You really don't. You need to use your own people that you've got. This is what I did in my old company. I used what I had, and it changed the way we worked. And you'll see soon we're doing some meet the ITXM practitioner sessions where I've talked to several of the ITXM practitioners that we know and work with, and they all say, without exception, it changes the way I work. It's not just we carry on with our ITIL processes and everything's bliss and we get this magic number, this 4.1, 3.7. We now see a whole load of new information and we have to do something with it, or we want to do something with it. So I think it changes the way of work, and you've got to be ready for that. So, and if you're not, then you need to be. I'm going to say it like that because it really does make a
Yeah,
difference. And
yeah.
I'm very passionate about this. I'm a former user of this platform and a former ITSM has been my life, and I wouldn't be so passionate about this if I didn't know that it can do better. It can deliver better than what the old things can. So this is why I'm so passionate about this, and I put effort into it. And why I love it when I see those customer stories where they say we were here, and almost without exception, they have an upward trajectory over time, without exception. And even the ones that put minimal effort in have still that movement upwards. And so I think that's what I would say about tooling and in a way how to get those better response rates. Make sure you do something with the data. That's the single biggest reason why people they turn off from CSAT and every other measurement survey you might do.
That's absolutely right, and we have referenced this in other sessions as well. But McKinsey actually looked into survey fatigue because it's one of the big reasons why people doubt CSAT, because response rates are low, and it's so easy to blame the tooling as well, saying that, well, nobody wants to fill out the survey, nobody wants to take the time to give feedback. But when McKinsey looked into over 20 academic articles that had studied survey fatigue, they found out that the number one reason why people don't give feedback is that they don't believe that the results will be acted upon. And that brings it back to the communication. If you get the data and act on it, then also tell the people that you did something with it. It's a small thing. We can all, if we put ourselves in the situation or the shoes of the respondent, of the end user, if you know that the feedback that you give will change IT for the better, you're so much more likely to give that feedback. We all know when we get some sort of survey from big companies and it asks, please let us know how we can improve your service. Maybe you've been a customer for years. You know nothing has ever changed. You don't think that answer matters. Of course, you don't want to give feedback. But IT has the ability to put in place ways to communicate through live screens, through different type of digital signage or simple intranet notifications, messages that just tell them, you said that these things were bad. We did what you asked us to do. It's a small things. It's that continuation, being consistent with the communication back to the end users, and response rates will go up. So it's make it easy, communicate back, and do something with the data. So now we basically come into the conclusion of this webinar that it is worth asking people. So then we come to the question mark, is CSAT dead? What is your take on this?
So I ask this on all the sessions I have in these practitioner ones that will be out soon. And I think most people believe it's not dead. It still has a place. It still has a usage. It's still quick and easy to do. It still gives you some level of something to measure, right? But one of the lines I remember one of the people I was interviewing said was, it does deliver something, but the line it delivers is so faint that I don't know what to do with it. And I think that for me means it has to be heavily supported by something else, or it just needs to be replaced with something else, right? Something better. And I think we all know there are better places, and I mentioned earlier from the 2020s and onwards, it's becoming much more likely now that people are starting to think to me it's dead because it hasn't really it's served its time, but we know it's still out there, so that's why I'm saying it's not dead. Do you know what I mean? It's not yet put in the grave. It's still doing something. But people are moving fast to something a bit better, a lot better. Sorry.
Yeah. And I think that the audience now can see that, I mean, we do believe in experience management. We see the results. We see how it changes the way that IT is being delivered. And it really is like the thing that we try to look at it all the time. And I work in the product team and looking at how we could develop the platform further. And we do look at all the time at like, what are the little details? What are all the little significant details in collecting the data, analyzing the data, communicating back the data, all those things? How can we make them better so that IT can actually focus on doing what matters most, which is improving IT, rather than spending then time on configuring, building, analyzing, crunching data, etc. Like, how can you just make it so that insights are quicker so that you can actually improve and then tell the people that you improved? And like that, experience management just becomes a natural part that doesn't feel like a chore. It actually becomes something that people in the IT organizations do become passionate about, and that also elevates their careers in addition to just making experience better for the end users. But any closing thoughts from you, Mark? What are your thoughts? How should we finish this webinar?
With a cup of tea. No, I think I think we've gone through a lot of stuff today. I'm hoping that people are still with us at this point in time. First off, I think we've covered, what CSAT is, where it's come from. There are obviously lots of different thoughts about where it's come from, where it was born, etc. But my view is the sort of 50s and onwards. We've talked about the fact that there are it has some limitations. It has some great things as well. It's quick and easy, like I talked about. We talked about the other routes you can take, the sort of the tooling, the off the shelf sort of products, as opposed to one you build yourself, which has its own challenges, pros and cons actually. And we talked about NPS as a sort of a scoring mechanism, which makes sense, right? Because it reacts quite quickly. And then we of course covered, is CSAT dead? And I think we agreed that it's not dead, but it's in its senior years, should we say that? And I think, I work with many customers from all size organizations, and I think the changes, I mentioned it earlier, that the changes in ways of work, I think, is probably the most important thing that I think I want to draw out of this, because it makes life so much more interesting when you are doing something more meaningful, and having something beyond a number allows you to do that, I would say. And if you are still here, thank you for
to summarize, it's we want to encourage you. We want to challenge you as the audience to go beyond CSAT, to look into dedicated experience management tools where all these different aspects that are important, that together play nicely to make that journey a pleasant one. Take the steps. You won't regret it. I think that's something that I want to just convey at the end of this, and it's worth doing. It's worth doing. Absolutely. So thank you for joining us today, everyone. And we hope to see you in the future sessions. And don't miss the Meet the Practitioner sessions that Mark mentioned. You will hear real-world stories and testimonials from our customers on how experience management, not CSAT, has changed their life and their IT service delivery in their organizations. So thank you for joining us today, and stay happy and stay safe. Bye-bye.
If you liked this episode, please give us thumbs up, rating, or share it with your colleagues to help others learn about this topic as well. To learn more, go to happysignals.com.